The lights went out before the train even stopped moving. 1 second, I was watching the tunnel walls blur past through the scratched window of the Line 2 subway, and the next second there was nothing, just black, total and sudden, the kind of dark that presses against your eyes like hands. The train lurched, coasted, and came to a full stop somewhere between Broadview and Castle Frank stations. A woman near the doors made a sound that wasn't quite a scream, but working toward it. Then Taryn Osi grabbed my hand. Not my sleeve, not my arm, my hand. Both of hers, fingers locking around mine with the particular desperation of someone who has just decided I am the only solid thing left in the world. "Carter," she said. Her voice was completely level, which meant she was terrified. "We're fine," I said. I had no evidence for this. It's probably just a TTC thing. Everything the TTC does is just a TTC thing right before it becomes a news segment. She wasn't wrong. We'd been living in Toronto long enough to have opinions about the transit system the way Torontonians have opinions about the Leafs. With love, without hope, and a deep awareness that our loyalty has never once been rewarded. The emergency strip lighting kicked in a few seconds later, casting everything in dim red. It was better than nothing. It was also slightly worse in a different way, because now I could see Taryn's face clearly, and her face was doing something I hadn't seen it do very often in 4 years of knowing her. She was scared. I should tell you about Taryn before I tell you what happened next, because the story doesn't make sense without her. She was 27, a pediatric physiotherapist at Sick Kids, the kind of job that required the rare combination of clinical precision and the ability to convince a 5-year-old that hip exercises were actually a game about robots. She was good at it, which probably didn't surprise anyone who knew her, because Taryn was good at most things she decided to try. She was also stubborn, easily annoyed by slow walkers, and deeply loyal to specific things. Her mom's jerk chicken recipe, a little coffee shop on Roncesvalles she'd been going to since undergrad, the Arkles, one particular mug with a chip in the handle she refused to throw out on principle. We'd met in our 3rd year at U of T, in a lecture on urban infrastructure that neither of us had any business being in. I was in communications, she was in kinesiology. We'd both apparently registered for the wrong class, spent 40 minutes trying to decide if it was worth leaving, then agreed the professor had good energy, and stayed the whole semester anyway. We got coffee after. We got coffee after that 3 more times before the course ended. By winter, we were each other's default person. The one you text when something weird happens at work. When the apartment above you is hosting a drum circle at 11 p.m., when you need someone to drive you to the walk-in and pretend not to notice you're crying a little. She was my best friend. She was also, if I was going to be honest with myself, something more complicated than that. I had been not being honest with myself for approximately 2 years and 8 months. I knew when it had started. Not gradually, the way you hear about in songs, not some slow accumulation of soft moments until one day you look over and realize. It had been specific and sudden and deeply inconvenient. We'd been at Nathan Phillips Square during the outdoor skating season, and she'd stumbled. Just a small thing, nothing dramatic. And when I caught her, she'd laughed up at me in the cold air with her cheeks pink and her breath making little clouds, and I'd thought, very clearly, I am completely done for. I told no one. I revised my behavior accordingly. I smiled at the right moments, did not hold eye contact a second too long, and never under any circumstances thought about what it would feel like to be the person she came home to. Best friends were not supposed to do those things. Best friends were supposed to help you move furniture, tell you when a haircut doesn't work, and pretend not to notice when you've been crying. I was very good at all 3. That evening, we'd been on our way back from the Danforth, a concert she'd wanted to see for 2 years, tickets we'd bought the previous March, and then texted each other about every few weeks in escalating excitement. It had been a good night. The music loud enough to stop thinking, and then the walk to Broadview Station with the October air sharp and the leaves still wet from an afternoon rain. Taryn had bought us both a hot chocolate from a vendor outside the venue, which in Toronto in October feels essentially mandatory. She'd bumped my shoulder twice on the platform, just because, the way she did when she was happy. She hadn't mentioned Caden. Caden was the man she'd been seeing, loosely and without formal definition, for about 2 months. They'd met through a mutual friend. He was a financial analyst, which she described as fine, I think, which told me everything. They had dinner roughly every 10 days. She mentioned him the way you mention a subscription you're not sure you actually use. In passing, without much color. I had opinions about Caden. I kept them extremely private. The driver's going to say something soon, I said, in the red-lit subway car. Around us, people were on their phones, trying to get signal, mostly failing. An older man across the aisle had a small keychain flashlight and was shining it at the ceiling like that might help. The driver has said nothing, Taryn said. It's been 3 minutes. 4. You've been counting? She didn't answer that. Her hands were still around mine. I was aware of this in the careful, cataloging way I'd learned to be aware of things when it came to her. The weight of them, the fact that her right thumb had gone still against my knuckle. I didn't say anything about it. I waited. A crackle from the PA. The driver's voice, professionally calm, the specific tone of someone trained to sound unbothered. Attention customers. We are experiencing a signal issue and are waiting from the operations center. We apologize for the inconvenience and thank you for your patience. Signal issue, I said. See, boring. Boring things don't kill all the lights, Taryn said. The emergency lights are on. Carter. She said my name the way she said it when I was being deliberately obtuse. It's dark in here. It's dim. We are underground, in a metal tube, with no reliable air circulation and no phone signal, and nobody has told us how long this is going to take. All of this was accurate. I could feel the air already starting to feel slightly warmer, slightly used, the way sealed air does when enough people breathe it long enough. Okay, I said, slightly dim and mildly concerning. She exhaled. It wasn't quite a laugh. Her thumb moved again, a small restless gesture, like she was checking to make sure I was still there. I'd known Taryn was not entirely comfortable with small enclosed spaces. She'd mentioned it once, offhandedly, a bad experience in an elevator as a kid. Stuck for 2 hours in the building where her grandmother lived. It had left a permanent low-grade unease she generally managed fine, except in situations where she was already tired or already stressed. She never made a big deal of it. She just preferred staircases when possible and didn't love it when subway rides went longer than expected. Talk to me, she said. It helps. So I did. I talked about the concert, the drummer who'd had an incredible moment in the third song, the woman in front of us, who'd known every single word to everything and sang with uncomplicated joy. I talked about the hot chocolate, which had been aggressively sweet in a way I'd loved unironically. I talked about how the street had smelled after the rain, that specific October smell that happens in Toronto exactly 4 or 5 times a year, wet leaves and cold stone, and something that might just be distance. Taryn listened. Her hands stayed around mine. 20 minutes passed. The PA came on twice more, with essentially the same information. People shifted, sighed, scrolled hopelessly at their phones. A teenage boy near the back had figured out a card game with 2 other teenagers, which I found genuinely impressive. Then the emergency lighting flickered. Not for long, a second, maybe a second and a half. But it went fully dark in that interval, complete dark, the kind your eyes can't adjust to, because there is truly nothing to adjust to. Taryn made a sound I'd never heard from her before. Small and involuntary, and immediately swallowed, like she regretted it before it finished. Hey, I said. I'm fine. You're allowed to not be fine. She was quiet for a second. Then very quietly, I don't like this. I know. Carter. Her voice had changed. Not panic, not quite. But something beneath the calm she usually wore, something stripped bare by the dark and the sealed air and the not knowing. What if something is actually wrong? Something is probably wrong with a signal relay some sort. And 12 people at the operations center are annoyed about it. That's not. She stopped. I turned toward her in the dark. I could feel the shape of her more than see her. The warmth of her shoulder against mine, the way we'd been sitting since Broadview because the car had been full enough when we boarded that it seemed natural. Taryn. She exhaled, and then she said, in the dark, very quietly, like the words had been waiting, and the dark had finally given them permission. If something happens, I need you to know. You're it for me, Carter. My chest went completely still. She kept going, faster now, like she was afraid she'd lose the nerve. Not in the, I'm not saying it like I mean, you're the person I think about. When things are good, I want to tell you first. When things are bad, I want you there. And I don't know why I keep pretending that's just what friendship feels like, because I know what friendship feels like, and it doesn't feel like this. The lights came back on. Not the emergency strip, the full lights. The train shuddered and began to move. The PA returned, thanking us for our patience, announcing Castle Frank in the next stop. Around us, people started talking again, putting phones away, gathering bags. Normal sound, normal light. The world reasserted itself with rude, complete efficiency. Taryn was looking straight ahead. Her hands were no longer around mine. At some point in the last 30 seconds, they had found their way back to her own lap, quiet, as if they'd never left. I watched the side of her face. You're it for me, Carter. Taryn, I said. We're almost at the station. Her voice was completely level again. I know. I shouldn't have. The dark does something to me. My brain treats the feeling of being trapped like the feeling of running out of time. And I said, Taryn. She finally looked at me. I let the silence hold for exactly long enough that she couldn't turn it into a joke. Did you mean it? I asked. The train arrived at Castle Frank. The doors opened. People filed out. Neither of us moved. We're going to miss the stop, she said. The stop will be there on the next train. Her jaw tightened slightly. Carter, did you mean it? She looked at me for a long moment. The doors closed. The train continued toward Sherborne. I don't know what I meant, she said finally. I know that's the worst possible answer. It's not the worst, I said. The worst would be no. Something shifted in her face. Not relief, not yet. Something more precarious. Like she'd been holding a shape for a long time, and I just named it out loud. I have a thing with Caden, she said. I know. It's casual. It's not serious. I know that too. She looked down at her hands. You always know too much. You always tell me everything. I paused. Except apparently the one thing that would have actually been useful to know. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. When were you going to tell me? About you? I had a whole plan, I said. She looked at me. My plan was not to tell you. She pressed her lips together and looked out the window at the tunnel wall, going past. That's a terrible plan. It was working. It was not working, Carter. She turned back. You got weird every single time I mentioned Caden's name. You think I didn't notice? I was subtle. You once changed the subject so hard mid-sentence that we ended up talking about the migratory patterns of Canada geese. That is a legitimate topic. I brought it up from me, saying I'd had dinner with him. I was quiet for a moment. The geese are genuinely interesting. A real laugh this time, short and a little undone. She covered her face with one hand. The train arrived at Sherborne. We stayed on. I don't know how to do this, she said, muffled, behind her hand. Do what? She dropped it. Want something and be scared of it at the same time. I think that's just wanting something. Her eyes found mine, and for a second, through all the noise in her face, the thinking, the calculating, the guarding, I saw her, the real version, the one she saved for late nights and hard conversations and the kitchen of her Roncesvalles apartment when she was tired and not performing competence for anyone. I need some time to figure things out, she said. Okay. I need to talk to Caden. Okay. You're being very calm. One of us has to be. I hate that it's you, but her mouth curved, just slightly. At Bloryong, we got off. The station was busy. A Thursday in October, people heading home from dinners and shows and nowhere in particular. We climbed the stairs to street level, and the cold hit us like a notification that real life was resuming. We didn't talk much on the walk to where we'd split for our separate buses. There was something between us now that was too big and too new to be treated casually, and we both seemed to understand that talking around it would only make it worse. At the corner of Bloor and Bay, she stopped. Carter. Yeah. She looked at me for a long moment. The streetlight caught the rain still drying in her hair. A streetcar went past behind us, slow and rumbling. I wasn't making it up, she said. In the subway, I was scared, but I wasn't confused. Something shifted in my chest. I know, I said, because I did. I had known from the moment she said it. That was the part that had made it impossible to let her take it back. She nodded, then turned and walked toward her bus stop, looking back once over her shoulder with an expression I wasn't sure she meant for me to see. I stood on that corner for longer than was strictly sensible. Taryn called Caden 2 days later. She told me about it the way she told me most things. Not immediately, not all at once, but over 2 cups of coffee at her kitchen table on a Saturday morning while it rained on the window, and she turned her chipped mug in her hands and assembled the words carefully, like she was proofing something before she sent it. She'd been honest with him. She'd said she'd realized her feelings were somewhere else, that she couldn't in good conscience keep seeing him, that she was sorry for the timing. He'd taken it with more grace than she'd expected, which she said made her feel both relieved and faintly guilty. He wasn't it, she said. I knew that. I think I'd been waiting for myself to feel differently about it. And now? She looked up from the mug. And now I'd like you to take me somewhere with real food and stop pretending you don't want to. So I did. I took her to a place on Queen West we'd walked past for 2 years without ever going in. One of those restaurants with a lineup that we'd always been slightly too hungry and too impatient to wait for. This time we arrived early, before the Saturday rush, and got a table by the window where the late afternoon light came in sideways and turned everything amber. It was not a first date in any traditional sense. We had known each other for 4 years. I knew she always ordered something off the menu she'd already decided on at home, then changed her mind completely when the server arrived. She knew I could not resist anything described as braised. We'd sat across from each other at tables more times than I could count. But this was different. The air between us had shifted in the way that changes a room you've been in 100 times. Same furniture, different light, and suddenly you're noticing things you somehow never clocked before. She was nervous. I could tell because she rearranged her cutlery twice. I was nervous. I could tell because I rearranged mine once and then pretended I hadn't. We ordered. We talked. The conversation went the way our conversations always went, quick and sideways. From the food to her worst patient of the week, a 6-year-old with the negotiating tactics of a labor lawyer, to a documentary I'd been meaning to watch, to whether a hot dog was a sandwich, which she had passionate and detailed opinions about. Halfway through the main course, she put her fork down and looked at me. "This is a date," she said. Yes, a real one. That was the intention. She considered this. You could have said that when you suggested it. I thought it would be more interesting to see if you'd figure it out. I figured it out immediately. I know. She smiled into her wine glass, small, pleased, a little exasperated. I had seen that expression on her face many times. It landed differently now. Afterward, we walked. It had stopped raining. The streets had that clean, just-washed quality that October nights sometimes have in Toronto. The kind that makes the city look like a version of itself that only appears occasionally, when the weather decides to be generous. Past the shop windows going dark, past the takeout places, still lit up and busy, past a busker outside Trinity Bellwoods, playing something slow and clear into the cold air. At some point, my hand found hers. Not dramatically, not as a statement, just as the most natural next step, fingers finding fingers, palm settling against palm. Taryn didn't say anything, she just held on. When we reached her building, she turned to face me on the sidewalk, the way you do when you're deciding how something ends. "I owe you a second date," she said. "Already planning it. And a third. Ambitious." I'm a fast learner. Her eyes were steady on mine. "Carter." "Yeah. I've been looking for the right moment to do this for about 2 months, and I have concluded there is no right moment, and I should just." She rose onto her toes and kissed me. It was not our first moment of honesty, but it was our first in the fullest sense, deliberate, chosen, without the dark or the fear or the not knowing as cover. Just Taryn on a rain-cleaned street in October deciding. When she pulled back, her hand was on my jacket lapel. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I agreed. She smiled. "You're not going to be smug about this?" "I am extremely smug about this. I'm containing it." The containment is appreciated. She tugged my lapel once, then let go. "I'm going to go inside before I say something embarrassing." "You don't do embarrassing." She gave me a look. "Carter, I told you that you were it for me in a stopped subway car with emergency lighting. And you meant it." She held my gaze for a second. "Yeah," she said, "I did." There is a moment, 3 months later, that I returned to. We were at her family's place for Sunday dinner. Her mother, her aunt, who'd come down from Sudbury for the weekend, her cousin in his first year at Ryerson, who had opinions about everything. It was the first time I'd been there, as something other than Taryn's friend Carter. I had been Taryn's friend Carter for 4 years. Her mother had fed me rice and peas on approximately 17 previous occasions without ceremony. This time, she hugged me when I arrived. A real hug, the kind that communicates something. During dinner, her aunt asked how we'd finally gotten together. Taryn looked at me from across the table with the expression of someone who had rehearsed an answer and was deciding whether to use it. "We were on the TTC," she said. "It was a whole thing." Her aunt looked unimpressed by the brevity. "There was a power outage," I added. "Underground. Roughly 23 minutes. Taryn pointed at me with her fork. "Don't." "What?" "I'm agreeing with you. You're making it sound like a hostage situation." "It had elements." Her aunt looked between us. Her mother was smiling into her glass. Her cousin said, "The TTC is genuinely terrible," which broke the moment in the best possible way. Later, washing dishes in her mother's kitchen, while the others were in the living room, Taryn stood beside me, passing plates without a word. The window above the sink looked out onto the backyard, dark and quiet. A few last leaves still on the maple tree. "For the record," she said, "it was exactly 23 minutes. You definitely counted." She handed me a plate. I was scared. Counting helps. "What were you counting toward?" "I don't know. Something to hold on to." She paused, "and then I held on to you instead." I set the plate down and looked at her. She was looking out the window in the way she did when she was thinking something. She hadn't fully shaped into words yet. "I'm glad the lights went out," she said. "Yeah," I said. "Me too." Not for the fear, not for the 23 minutes of sealed air and red emergency lighting, but for what the dark had done. It had made the walls thin enough for the truth to come through. The truth that had been sitting right there between us for years. Patient and quiet, waiting for one of us to stop being careful long enough to say it. The following spring, we took the subway together to the waterfront on a Saturday in April, the first warm weekend of the year, the kind that brings all of Toronto outdoors at once. The line was crowded. We found a seat near the window, shoulder to shoulder, the way we'd sat that October night. Somewhere between Spadina and Bathurst, the train slowed unexpectedly. Taryn's hand found mine, immediately, without hesitation, one firm squeeze. But when I looked at her face, she wasn't white-knuckling the moment. She was watching the tunnel wall go past, calm and easy. Her thumb moved over my knuckles, that same checking gesture from the dark, making sure I was still there. The train picked up speed again. Nothing had happened, just a slow section of track. She glanced at me sideways. "Still here," I said. "I know," she said. "That's the point." She rested her head on my shoulder, and outside the window the tunnel opened up, and the late afternoon light came in sudden and bright, and we rode the rest of the way to the waterfront with our hands laced together. Not because we were afraid, but because it was the truest way we knew to say, "I choose this. I choose you," not in the dark, not because I thought we were running out of time, but now, in the light with everything still ahead of us. What would you have done if the person beside you in the dark finally said what they'd been holding back for years? Have you ever had a moment where fear made the truth the only option left? Tell me about it in the comments. And if you want to be a little closer to this space, we've opened memberships with shorter exclusive stories every week and no ads. If this one meant something to you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.